Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is The Fountainhead. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of The Fountainhead with leather cover, designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself, if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. The Fountainhead is a 1943 novel by Russian-American writer Ayn Rand. She is better known for her later mega novel Atlas Shrugged, but for me her crowning achievement is The Fountainhead. Rand started as a novelist, but became more philosophical as she matured. She has always been idealistic, but with age she became more direct and outspoken about it. Over the years, she developed an ideology she called objectivism, which she introduced in The Fountainhead. Objectivism, in a nutshell, is individual above all, and reason as his only religion. Rand's philosophy was a result of the trauma she experienced during the Russian Revolution and ensuing Red Terror during the Civil War. It gave her a preview of what happens when society sacrifices the individual in the name of collectivism. The Fountainhead was rejected by 12 publishers, and the reason given was that there was no audience for it. I think today this is more true than back then because of the drastic shift to the left in America and the West in general. Rand herself said that the book is for the chosen few who will understand it, and for the rest, they can go to red hell. Well, actually, she said she doesn't care. Rand's two favorites, and probably inspires, were Aristotle, whose philosophy was based on virtues, so important to Rand herself, and let's not forget that he was a tutor to Alexander the Great, who went out and somewhat single-handedly conquered the world, and probably was an inspiration for some of Rand's created heroes. The other one was the French writer Victor Hugo, and I can see Jean Valjean from Les Miserables and his struggle against the society being another inspiration for Rand. What is The Fountainhead about? At its core, it is about freedom, as it is defined in the novel by Rand. Freedom: to ask for nothing, to expect nothing, to depend on nothing. The book implies that it is your right and competence to make decisions for yourself, and the society benefits from it indirectly and, if needed, with your permission. On the surface, the book is about individual versus collective, the giver versus the taker, and how it is the individual who is the benefactor and responsible for all the progress of the society. The Fountainhead portrays a semi-dystopian present that will lead to the dystopian future. It is a unique take on the eternal struggle between good and evil, and further, it indirectly serves as an introduction into Rand's philosophy of objectivism and how it expresses itself in the real world. A bit of the plot. The plot is quite straightforward, but somewhat lengthy. The story begins with Howard Rourke, an eccentric architect, and his expulsion from the distinguished but fictitious Stanton Institute of Technology, probably inspired by MIT, Peter Killing, who sees himself as the Rourke's professional rival and in whose house Rourke was renting a room, graduates from the very same school. Both of them go to New York, and Keating gets a job in a prestigious architectural firm, while Rourke succeeds in being hired by an out-of-favor and forgotten skyscraper pioneer, the only person he respects in his profession. And thus starts the somewhat parallel lives of the two. Keating's ambition outweighs his talent, but he is willing to give people what they want and gets rewarded for it. All Rourke has to offer, besides his talent, is his integrity, which doesn't let him make any compromises to please his clients, and he gets rewarded for it as well. Later we meet Dominic Franken, a somewhat unconventional young lady, unable to find her place in the world, who, because of her own psychological oddity, forms somewhat of a love triangle with the two men. Then we are introduced to Ellsworth M. Toohey, a self-declared socialist and influential architect-critic who perceives the true potential of Rourke and the danger it presents to his own agenda. Toohey is Rourke's true enemy, and all his subsequent efforts go into elevating Keating and undermining Rourke. Later in the book, we meet Gail Wynand, who is a self-made millionaire and the owner of the prominent gossip tabloid, where Toohey publishes his architectural column. He represents another personality type and becomes part of the complex relationship between all the protagonists. As the book progresses, all the characters slowly become more transparent and disclose who they really are and what they are after. And that's the basic plot. What are my thoughts about the Fountainhead? It is quiet and impactful reading. The book draws, in a seemingly paradoxical way, the contrast between what Rand calls the selfishness of nonconformity and integrity versus the selflessness of selling oneself for money, fame, and power. Selfishness in the novel is a positive quality which allows the individual to be who he is and live his life according to his own rules. And as the result, he is able to create and indirectly benefit the society. In contrast, selflessness is described as the downfall of the individual whose purpose is to please and live for others, and as the result, he is not able to use his talents to create, and becomes a parasite feeding on others. Rand also calls this the struggle between creator and parasite. The creator stands on his own judgment. The parasite follows the opinions of others. The creator thinks, the parasite copies. The creator produces, the parasite loots. The creator's concern is the conquest of nature. The parasite's concern is the conquest of man. The creator requires independence. He neither serves nor rules. He deals with man by free exchange and voluntary choices. The parasite seeks power. He wants to bind all men together in common action and common slavery. He claims that man is only a tool for the use of others, that he must think as they think and act as they act, and live his life as a selfless, joyless servitude to any need but his own. So this is the main point of the novel, and it is presented through the behavior of different individuals. The hero of the story is Howard Rourke, the man who simply is, a fictitious product of Rand's philosophy and what she calls an ideal of a man. He is an extreme example and shouldn't be seen as a real-world equivalent and somebody to aspire to be like. I would say Rourke is to objectivists what, in my opinion, Jesus, not so much the real person but the idea, became to Christianity. Rand herself would probably hate this comparison since she despised organized religion. Anyway, Rourke as Jesus, with a few true believers looking up to him and the ignorant masses trying to crucify him. And eventually he is resuscitated by the god of architecture. I think this paragraph from the book does a good job at summing up Rourke. Throughout the centuries, there were men who took first steps down new roads, armed with nothing but their own vision. Their goals differed, but they all had this in common, that the step was first, the road new, the vision unborrowed, and the response they received, hatred. The great creators, the thinkers, the artists, the scientists, the inventors, stood alone against the men of their time. Rourke is self-centered and egocentric, and not interested in humanity and its plight. All his actions are self-serving, which in the eyes of society is not favorable. But Rand argues that society, or the collective, is a negative and parasitic force that is only able to progress because of people like Rourke. I remember a story about an intimidating salesman I heard, which seems to be a comical version of Rourke. His clients would start with "I want," and he would cut them off by saying, "I don't care what you want, I will tell you what I have, and that's what you want and will buy." Peter Keating, the man who could never be and didn't know it, as described by Rand, is the opposite of Rourke. For me, he is the most tragic figure of the novel because his tragedy is so final and hopeless. He lacks his own identity, and all his actions are motivated by the wants and opinions of others. And this defines him as selfless. But according to Rand, being selfless is a negative quality because it prohibits Keating from seeing and realizing his own purpose, thus turning him into a parasite that feeds off the system, just like the society that controls his life. He's the definition of what Rand calls second-hander. Not selfishness, but precisely the absence of a self. He knows himself to be dishonest, but others think he is honest, and he derives his self-respect from that, second hand. The man who takes credit for an achievement which is not his own, he knows himself to be mediocre, but he is great in the eyes of others. The frustrated wretch who professes love for the inferior and clings to those less endowed, in order to establish his own superiority by comparison. They are second-handers. They have no concern for facts, ideas, work. They are concerned only with people. They don't ask, "Is this true?" They ask, "Is this what others think it is true?" Not to judge, but to repeat, not to do, but to give the impression of doing. Keating finds comfort in Toohey because Toohey confirms and justifies his actions. Ellsworth M. Toohey, the man who could never be and knew it, according to Rand, is the one I find most fascinating of all the characters, because he can disguise himself and play and fool everybody so well, and very few people can see through him. He is the puppet master and true nemesis of Rourke. He is one of the few that can fully appreciate the greatness of Rourke's work, and because of it he can see its danger to his own mission. While the other characters live somewhat in the present, he is the one with vision and knows what the end game is. Toohey represents the ever-present dark force of the collective at war with individualism. He is the enforcer of the society, out to search, identify, and destroy any unit not willing to conform and submit. Toohey is the biggest danger to the individual and his creativity. He will lie, manipulate, and corrupt to achieve his aim because for him the end justifies all the means. I can see him as the embodiment of Machiavelli's prince, but in a more spiritual way. He can be compared to Lucifer collecting souls for his master Satan. Toohey seems asexual and, like a monk, celibate, so all his energy can go into his self-fabricated mission. He attracts a specific kind of individuals who are ambitious but talentless and without any individual achievements. There is a certain tranquility, assurance, and coolness about Toohey when he is around other people, since to him they are predictable and controllable. But he becomes insecure when facing Rourke, and he is inquisitive when others mention him. Toohey, through his ideological speeches, reminds me of Lenin before the Russian Revolution, and unfortunately for us, he seems to have the clearest idea of the future and where humanity is heading. Gail Wynand, the man who could have been, is an example of someone with a potential for becoming Howard Rourke, but because of his uncontrolled need for power, he becomes Peter Killing on steroids, driven by others instead of himself, and giving the public what it wants, in exchange for the illusion of power over them. Winan can be seen as worse than Killing because he had tools to be something great, but he misused them, while Killing never had a chance. To convince himself that he made the right choice, Winan buys Rourke-like people to prove that such people don't exist. He asks Rourke, "What do you think about me, Howard?" And Rourke answers that you were not born to be a second-hander. But he says to himself, there is no worse second-hander than the one that goes after power. And later in the book, Winan says, anybody can be forgiven, but not I. I was not born to be a second-hander. Rand includes a bit of biographical background for Winan and Toohey to show how they arrive at their ideologies and how they became who they are. Toohey's behavior can be explained by the fact that the creators and achievers found him insignificant and simply ignored him, and his vendettas and crusades against them are a cry for attention. After one of his successful sabotages of Rourke's work, when he accidentally runs into him, he asks, "What do you think about me now, Mr. Rourke?" And Rourke replies, "I don't think about you." Dominic is somewhat of an outside spectator, who's able to see the game, but she's also personally impacted by it and its outcome, and not able to psychologically deal with what she knows. She chooses self-punishment as a remedy, or probably more of a consultation for her suffering. Dominic helps Peter Killing and seems to like Toohey because she thinks they are the very people the world she despises deserves. She is kind of an avenging angel. Her initial dislike of Rourke is because he doesn't fit in the model of the world she created for herself, but later he becomes a speckle of hope in the sea of hopelessness and a possibility of deliverance. Probably there are some of Rand's own sentiments projected through Dominic, being a woman in the early 20th century, powerless and undervalued. Rand paints a colorful picture of capitalism, her favorite animal, versus socialism, the boogeyman of humanity. In her opinion, capitalism is the motivator, the creator, and the self-sustained producer responsible for all real advancement of humanity. In contrast, socialism is a parasite feeding off and slowly destroying capitalism by robbing what it didn't produce. This is somewhat simplified description, but it draws a general difference between the two. I would say that differences are more subtle since both beasts engage in production, but distinction lies in that one puts all the responsibility on the individual and the other places it in the not so capable hands of the society. So the fundamental question is who is more adept and efficient at delivering to making general life not perfect but better. And I think there are plenty of real-life examples to give you the answer. Socialism cannot survive without capital or capitalism, just like parasite cannot survive without host. So it is strange the antagonistic approach to capitalism by socialists. I think socialism is complementary to capitalism since neither extreme is good. You can apply a culinary metaphor where capitalism is the main dish and you spice it up with a bit of socialism to make it taste better. But you have to be careful because if you put too much of it, you won't be able to eat it. And that's the problem with the socialists. They want to be the principal or the only course, and that's just communism, which becomes unsustainable in the long run. Rand says that there are a few Rourkes in every generation and they move the world. I think there are too few Rourkes to change the world at its foundation, They are able to leave behind a few exceptional works and achievements, but looking at the history, I would say the people who built America and consequently the world are more like Gail Wynand and even Peter Keating, flexible enough to overstep a few rules, borrow or steal from others, and give the masses what the masses want. Basically, they conform to the society to claim their rewards. Further, when talking about Cameron, who was a pioneer skyscraper builder and somewhat of an inspiration and a role model for Rourke, the book implies that the two types, the creator and the parasite, similar to the before-mentioned capitalism and socialism, could collaborate to achieve success. Cameron was the best, but he had success because he had a little man who knew how to sell his vision. But the little man died, and so did Cameron's success. And later, there is a possibility of Rourke and Keating working together, where Rourke does the design and Keating does the public relations and selling, and it could have been a success if it wasn't for TUI. The Fountainhead is also Rand's view of the world. Before you can do things for people, you must be the kind of man who can get things done. But to get things done, you must love the doing, not the secondary consequences. The work, not the people. Your own action, not any possible object of your charity. I myself like the next one, since I have seen plenty of it firsthand. A quest for self-respect is proof of its lack. The book also deals with past versus future. Most people are afraid of the unknown, so they stick to the known. In the book, the past and the classics. Then there are a few people who have no fear and look to the future, to the new and modern, for inspiration and even hope. And they are responsible for the general progress of the society. But the divisions between the two are vague and blurred. To sum it up, The Fountainhead is one of those iconic works of literature that impacted many people. The book was given to me by a stranger when I was 30 years old, and I have reread it every decade or so. Together with some other things, it influenced me to live my own life somewhat outside the system and not to worry too much about material and social success and opinions of others. The Fountainhead is a controversial novel, and most people either like it or hate it. It has, under the surface, a political debate, right versus left, and everybody has strong convictions about it, so probably that's what creates the extreme opinions in the readers. I think many critics of Ayn Rand, not all, can be summed up in this line uttered by Ellsworth M. Toohey. No speech is ever considered, but only the speaker. It is so much easier to pass judgment on a man than on an idea. Your personal reaction to the book will depend on your own experiences and view of the world. Rand might seem to exaggerate, but she had a front-seat view of what progressive leftist policies will do to a society, as she wrote it in this paragraph. Look at history. Everything we have, every great achievement, has come from the independent work of some independent mind. Every horror and destruction came from attempts to force man into a herd of brainless, soulless robots. Without personal rights, without personal ambition, without will, hope, or dignity. It is an ancient conflict. It has another name, the individual against the collective. I spent the first part of my life behind the Iron Curtain, so I am with her on this one. By destroying and sacrificing the individual for the sake of the collective, which is the foundation of socialism, you destroy the society, because society is nothing more than a collection of individuals. Most people in the West, especially the young, are somewhat politically ignorant and have a romanticized vision of the left. They like the idea of free goods and services it promises them, since they are not contributing yet. Once they get a little older or more successful and start paying, they usually change how they feel about free stuff. I am fine with paying for basic infrastructure and primary education, but the items such as higher education or housing are your personal choice and responsibility. Further, nothing in life is free. Somebody has to pay and do the work, and I don't know of any professors pushing some of this ideological garbage, suggesting cutting their own salaries in half. The book is a bit of a warning for where we might be heading if we become too comfortable and simply accept shallow and even false promises of populism. But will we heed it? Probably not. The nonconformists are too engaged with their own projects and have little interest in the lives of others. And the masses are too emotional, too envious, too hateful, too ignorant, and too dumb to use their critical thinking and see how they might get screwed in the long run. There is a young Cuban painter in the place where I do my creative work who left the island a couple of years ago. I am surprised how much more mature and realistic his views are compared to the people his age here in the West. He laughs when told that here the leftist policies, even communism, would work differently, somehow better. When I lived in Latin America, the argument was similar. They believed that they could make it work, implying they were more competent than us in the Eastern Europe. Then they got Venezuela, where the level of human misery is even a step above the old Soviet bloc, and it surprises me that there still are people in the neighboring countries who believe they can do it. It is true that the majority of people don't learn until they get bitten on their own ass. Anyway, the Fountainhead is somewhat of an extreme view, perhaps because Rand was an extremist and also she wanted to make sure her ideas are clear. You can enjoy the story, but I wouldn't take her ideas literary. Rand said herself that she doesn't like realistic novels because it is not art, and she doesn't want you to imitate her heroes, but to look at them and enjoy the spectacle, and perhaps draw some conclusions. The plot is the lesson in persistence and not giving up on your dream when faced with defeat, and also it shows the difference between personal inspiration and political ideology. And if you think winning turns you into an asshole, so does losing. Thus, we all are assholes. With this out of the way, perhaps you can be less judgmental and enjoy the story more. If you are interested in Rand's philosophy, then you need to do some thinking to see how what she's saying materializes in the real world, and what kind of effect it might have on your life. To be fair, Ayn Rand had a few wrong ideas, but that doesn't automatically negate many things she got right. For me, personally, a lot of what she says makes sense, but there are some views, such as the focus on the absolute, that I cannot connect with. I see life more as a compromise and relative experience. The subtle question that arises from reading The Fountainhead is what would most people be without their money, prestige, approval, family name, etc., etc., etc. Maybe they would be more themselves, the real person. Perhaps the grand message that can be universally taken out of the novel is to live your own life and not to give in to social pressures, and you probably will end up happy in a more profound and raw sense of the meaning of being happy. There is a 1949 film version of The Fountainhead starring Gary Cooper, for which Rand wrote the script but wasn't happy about how it turned out. I think the movie doesn't do any justice to the book. The Fountainhead is too complex to be effectively squeezed into 2-hour visual media. Well, it was a long review, so let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transformed into a hardcover leather-bound edition To make the cover, I use grade A, naturally tan hide. I buy from a tannery in North Spain. This same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First I design the cover, which what I did here, I used this painting of New York skyline, which looks like a watercolor of an architectural drawing, and I thought it nicely related to the story. This is the back with the blurb, and inside the front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform a paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100, but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel. And for every 100 donations, I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture. It smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.